Thanks, Cian Corla. I have to say, they say that the bite of a dying snake is the most vicious, and I think we've really seen it here tonight with the venom that has been spewing from the mouths of government deputies and ministers. And I think the brazenness of the Labour Party to attempt to address this indefensible appointment as some sort of a crusade for gender equality really takes the biscuit. It is frankly the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in here, and let's face it, it's up against some pretty stiff competition with regard to that. I have to say I don't generally agree with no confidence motions. I think they're issues which should only be taken in exceptional circumstances, and I want to put on the record that I don't view the Tánaiste any differently than I view any of the other members of the government. I actually have no confidence in any of you, but I wouldn't single out the Tánaiste in that regard. And in that sense, I wouldn't have maybe normally contributed to this debate, but I felt I had absolutely no choice whatsoever on behalf of the 15,000 members of the Irish Aviation Superannuation Scheme, who even half of them probably don't know that the Tánaiste was involved in the appointment, or that there was any question mark over the process. Prior to that even getting into the media, people, when they heard that David Begg had got this position, were utterly gobsmacked, precisely because of his role with regard to pensions. Now, I couldn't believe it when I listened to Alex White in the car on Morning Ireland yesterday morning coming into work, where he tried to tell the nation repeatedly that the appointment was by the book. Well, we all know that it wasn't really by the book. In actual fact, it was against the whole spirit of the book, but relying on one line buried in the middle of it. He then went on to tell us repeatedly that nobody had a problem with David Begg. Best thing since sliced bread as far as pensions were concerned. That is not true. It's actually manifestly false. And Minister White continued to repeat ad nauseum that he was manifestly and exceptionally qualified. That is not true. And I want to make some points with regard to that. David Begg was on the board of Aer Lingus, and David Begg was head of the Irish Congress Trade Unions at a time and played a role in the IASS scheme, which saw the living standards of members of that scheme, existing retired members, deferred pensioners, absolutely decimated. And people will be appalled to listen to what Minister Howland said. They'd be struck dumb at the description of David Begg fighting for ordinary pension members, because it's just not true. The Labour Relations Commission, and I have a letter here, pleaded with the Irish Congress of Trade Unions and indeed Aer Lingus and the DAA to assist and shape and up to their responsibilities with regard to the IASS pension scheme. I have a letter here from the LRC writing to the Irish Congress of Trade Unions with David Begg at the helm from 2011, asking that organisation to deal with the future pension scheme and their views on how the process would be resolved. What was the answer to that? Absolutely nothing. I have a letter from 2012 to the same Irish Congress of Trade Unions, headed by David Begg, from the Retired Aviation Staff Association, against the backdrop of Aer Lingus going into the commercial courts, trying to reduce its capital and jeopardising the accrued benefits of Aer Lingus pensioners who had paid for a reasonable expectation in their retirement. They appealed to the Irish Congress of Trade Unions to stand in on their side. What did the Irish Congress of Trade Unions and David Begg do? Absolutely nothing. That is the record of David Begg in terms of these issues. Now, what happened to those people, and what process did David Begg stand over for those pensioners? They were excluded from any negotiations about their livelihoods. Presently today, €6.5 million have been taken out of their pockets since last year. Coincidentally, the Aer Lingus company, which is one of the companies in that, in the same period allowed the last chief executive walk away, one person, with €6 million. Now, that amount was equivalent to what's been robbed in 1 year from existing pensioners. And David Begg was a board member and party to that injustice. They ensured that no mitigation monies were put in to defray the cuts to existing pensioners. Pensioners were not allowed to sit at the table and be involved in those negotiations. The Retired Aviation Staff Association wrote on numerous occasions to the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, begging for their assistance in that regard, and the door was kept firmly shut on them. Those people who built the companies, who worked there all their lives, and all of whom were trade union members who paid their subs throughout their entire time there. When the new Workplace Relations Bill came forward, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions did nothing to advance the position of pensioners or give them a voice in the talks. In actual fact, they argued against it. And I have to say, if this is the expertise that we're relying on, well, people should be very, very afraid, because not only did David Begg do absolutely nothing for those pensioners who are now have their livelihoods diminished. As I said, they've had millions taken out of their pockets. They've had a unilaterally imposed Section 50 debt repayment put on their monthly income. One of them made the point to me today that in 2008, the VHI contributions used to be 11% of state pensions. Now they're 28% of that pension. They've had their cuts to their private scheme is on top of the 2.5% pension levy, and they didn't even get a voice in that process. Do the ministers know, when David Begg was head of the Irish Congress Trade Unions and under his watch, how many pension initiatives were put forward by the Irish Congress of Trade Unions? None. Not one. Not only that, he was the head of the Irish Congress Trade Unions when their own pension fund floundered, became underfunded, cut benefits and closed the entrance to new members. One of the trustees of that scheme was Brian Duncan, also involved in the troubled pension scheme in situ, and the same person who was chair of the trustees in the IASS scheme when David Begg was on the board of that company. So pensioners, robbed of a legitimate expectation to a decent income on their retirement, which they paid for, stood over by this man as a member of the board of Aer Lingus and as the head of the Irish Congress Trade Unions. Well, do you know what? With expertise like that, I think we're very much in trouble. The one thing I agree with Deputy Spring, the pension industry needs to be challenged. There's no question about that. The pension authority needs to be challenged. I've no hesitation in saying it is rotten to the core. And adding David Begg into the mix isn't going to help. In actual fact, I'd nearly say it'd increase the rottenness stake. This organisation needs to be taken on. I think it was a severely disappointing appointment, indefensible, and you can dress it up all you like, but there's people out there tonight who are poorer in their retirement because of David Begg, and they're not one bit happy with you.